3 years and 80 plus conversations later, I still get asked the same three questions. Hi, I'm Roger Kastner, and this is What Do You Know to Be True, a professional development and leadership podcast for people who are discovering, building, or already living into their purpose and their possible selves. The three questions I get asked: what do my guests have in common? How do you find your superpower? And how do you reinvent your life and work to be more in line with your purpose? Not too long ago, I was in a conversation with a guest who asked me those same three questions. And so as we're heading into our third anniversary, I thought it was a great time to do a 3 for 3 episode where I share those answers with you. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive into that first question. What do the guests have in common?
And I'd be curious to ask you this, Roger, if you notice, because what you're doing is an experiment. You're actually tending to all these different people as they answer this question around their superpower. I'm curious if you see common themes to people as they talk about their superpowers.
Yes. And in every conversation, empathy, curiosity, and connection comes through as people talk about their superpowers. I will occasionally joke about superheroes get to wear capes, not because they're doing that thing for themselves. They are, but it's in service of other people that it becomes a superpower. It becomes, and they become heroes. It requires that connection. The curiosity is there because the superpower, I believe, is always unfolding, that they are learning more about their superpower and their relationship through their superpower with the world.
My whole body lit up when you talked about that. You're noticing that empathy and connection and this sense of serving others is core to a lot of people's superpowers. I think that's remarkable. This is why I think superpowers is so important in our times, because, there's a pandemic of loneliness and a kind of hyper individuality, and particularly in the West, we've privileged like the individual and individuality. And it can lead to this sense of like, I'm just me in this isolated world. I stop where my skin stops, and I think this is that view that I articulated a little while ago, where we're being invited into a sense of relatedness and service and empathy and connection. And that's a collective superpower that humanity has. And so, just amazing to hear you speak into that. It's not just about recognizing our innate value solo. It's a relational thing. We evolved in relationship, and we evolve in our superpower in relationship. And it's about that being mirrored back to us.
I think there's a little bit of synchronicity around this. We are innately valuable. We are innately connected, and we just need to be able to see that. And it takes work. It takes the internal focus. But to your point, it takes the external focus as well, of seeing one another, of seeing the miracle of life in and of itself, of these connections. And that's where I think going back to empathy, curiosity, and connection really plays in, and why it shows up in superpowers, because how could it not? That's Joel Monk. He's a leadership coach and the founder of Coaches Rising. And when he was on the podcast, he was getting curious about my experience with other guests and their superpower. And so he was asking me these questions, which led to this question: how does one find their superpower?
My theory, and this is my question to you, my theory is that a lot of people's superpowers, if you go deep enough into it, like there's a very unique way it's expressed through that individual person, but in some ways it's serving the emergence of life, because life itself is evolving through us as individuals. So there's this kind of way that life itself comes through us as individuals and expresses itself as these unique superpowers.
So the name of the podcast is a little tongue-in-cheek, this idea of what do you know to be true, where truth is always evolving. Like the impermanence of life, and hopefully things are moving in a progressive way. One of the patterns that has emerged in these conversations is this superpower actually started off typically as an unmet need from early in development. There is something there that was missing. Now, it could have been something that was either from a bad experience, a trauma, or it was just something that wasn't present. And then individuals find a talent or a thing that they do that tends to that unmet need, which then they want to do more and more of that thing because it's part of their healing. And it's, cliche, but the 10,000 hours, the more you do that thing and you get better at it, the more it's healing. It becomes a superpower the moment you do it in service of other people. And I would say about 9 out of 10 times that's the arc. And every once in a while I talk to someone like yourself where it wasn't, at least what I'm hearing is there wasn't something missing. There was something that was role modeled. And it's like, yes, this is for me. I'm going to do more of it. And then it shows up throughout life. I've talked to a couple people who've had that experience, that something was so true to their core that they just wanted to amplify it through their experiences in life. But I would say, most times that superpower actually starts from that moment of unmet need. Okay, now the third question, which is the most difficult one to answer. How do you reinvent yourself and your work to become more aligned with your purpose and your possible self? The answer is as varied as the individual who's asking the question. However, here's what's interesting. The same themes keep coming up, conversation after conversation. So as I continue this experiment, I'm really curious to see if this is pattern recognition, confirmation bias, or if there is a repeatable framework that we could all use. After you hear my answer, I'd love to hear what you think. These conversations are an experiment. It is a trying to understand, what is the relationship with a superpower, and why is a superpower even something that exists for us? And I think it does go back to this concept of trying to achieve our potential, trying to live into our possibilities, and having these conversations for 2 years, and in my own curiosity, thinking about, okay, what are the building blocks to living into our potential or living into our possible selves? The first set of conversations, it was really clear. Purpose, relationship between superpower and purpose. Purpose gives our superpower a North Star. When I was talking to someone about purpose, they were talking about the role of joy, and joy being a fuel for us living into our superpower. Joy is a building block, not only an output or an outcome of being in our superpower, but also motivating. Like, we know we're going to get joy. It's that dopamine, the anticipation of getting the joy that gets us to do the superpower. Next, I think hope plays a big role. And I'm using the Charles Snyder definition of hope, of the belief in our goals, in our path, and our agency. We need to have that sense of, okay, we can make change happen. We can deploy our superpower. Then adaptability comes in around resilience and growth mindset and learning agility. We could go down the path of the self-improvement paradigm, or just the ability to learn something new, to show up differently in a place that demands us to show up differently. After that, I think well-being kicks in with the sense of, mental, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual fitness. Not health, but fitness. These are all things we have to continue to work at to maintain a certain level of health or fitness. After that, I think it's courage, because we could have our North Star. We could know where we get our fuel. We could believe in our ability to affect change. We can, be adaptable and resilient. We could be healthy. Sometimes we just need to kick our ass out of bed and get in the arena. And that's where courage, I think, shows up for so many of these superpowers. And lastly, this last piece, and I think I only came to it maybe about 6 months ago when I heard a critique of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Critique was, it's focused only on self, only on what I can do. And we know we don't do anything by ourselves. It's always in community. It's always on a team. It's both the team that help, or the teams that help us got to where we are today, and the teams that we're on today that we get to flourish, that we get to demonstrate these superpowers. And it'll be the teams and communities we're in tomorrow that help us also continue to grow. And I'm really fascinated by this idea of not not only what teams can do for us, but I think really the path is what can we do for teams? How do we show up as a good teammate? How do we show up as a good member of a community? I think that not only helps other people live into their superpowers, but I think that's where our superpower begins to flourish. So I love the words that you use, the collective superpower, because ultimately that's something that's emergent for me. And it's also always been there, because a superpower by itself, without relationship, is not really a superpower, it's just power. So there you go. The 3 questions I often get and the responses I give when people ask me what I know to be true from these conversations. Thank you to Joel Monk for asking me these questions in our conversation. Thank you to the 80 guests who've been on the podcast for the first 3 years. And thank you for being in this conversation with us. What Do You Know to Be True is a 3 Blue Pens production, and I'm your host, Roger Kastner. We are recording on the ancient lands of the Duwamish and Suquamish. If you want to learn more about what I've learned about joy, check out this episode. And if you're interested in listening to the full conversation with Joel Monk, here you go. Okay, be well, my friends. And as always, love you, mean it.